How to be sure that your project carries an important mission.
Let's jump in the topic of how to create your own AI product.
So I thought of briefly telling about my background so that you guys get an idea about who am I and where am I coming from. So I actually divide my professional life in 4 parts. So I was actually, first of all, an AI researcher, published research papers, moved on to become an entrepreneur, built 6 companies. Then there was a part of my life when I was more educationalist. I was traveling around the world, giving talks. I spoke in over 30 countries. And then since a couple of years ago, I called myself spiritual being and I started building Omdena because I believe that what we are building in Omdena is also very spiritual, but also is AI for good, social good, and other things. And today's talk, I will kind of talk about collecting all the experiences that I had building different startups and working in AI field over 10 around years, and also around building Omdena and what I have seen. And as you can see, we have run over 300 projects in the last 3 years since we started, working with organizations in 65 countries, I think. And we have around 85 chapters around the world in 33 or 32 countries. Can we move to the next slide? So I think the key to, so I come from a also very technical background. So I used to write code, build softwares. What we all need to understand, first of all, is that the 87% of AI data science projects never make into production. That's a very, very high number of failure rate. I mean, any industry will have that kind of failure rate, will be gone. But it's still AI is still, because of the hype, the potential, there's a lot of people invested into this. Now, why is that such a big problem? And I always argue that the biggest problem of AI is the AI adoption, not the technology development. It's easy to build the technology, but it's actually the product and then actually launching the product and making people use the product. And that's where I have a few things to say, which I will share some of my experience. Can you move to the next slide? Yeah. So I will talk about the key focus of today, next 10, 12 minutes would be, how do you make products that makes people adopt and use your solutions? And there will be 4 points that I will basically touch upon. The next slide, please. And I will try to take one use case. This is actually a startup that I was the founding member of. It started 2013, and the goal of this was actually tracking how people are driving and making them better drivers to reduce the accidents. Now, this startup was kind of 2013, 14, so 8 years ago. So, but I will bring up some topics that would be relevant. Now, there's a first point. The first and most important thing is that when you are building your solution, you build and launch your product progressively based to different user groups. Now, one of the mistakes that a lot of developers do is they try to focus on building a perfect product right in the beginning and then launch to the masses. That may not be the right strategy. In our case, what happened that what we typically, I don't know how many of you know this curve. This is called adoption curve. So it's basically there are different user groups. There are innovators, there are early adopters, there are early majority and late majority. Typically, most of the people lie in the early majority and late majority. But when you are launching a product and you're first starting it, you don't launch your product necessarily always on the early majority. You start with the innovator market, then you move to the early adopters, and then you move to the early majority. And it's very important to understand each of those groups and understand who those groups of people are, what are their motivations are, and why would they start using your solutions. And it's important that you go progressively one after another. So can you go to the next slide? So the first stage of whenever you are creating your first product is to go from 0 to 1, right? So you're focused on the innovators. Now, who are these innovators? The next slide. So the innovators are often, they are the people that connect to a mission or a vision of what you are doing. So in our case, when we were building this app for the road safety, our innovators were people who are passionate about making roads safer, for example. So they are many times they're activists, and they are often what I've seen that they're one-timer. They will come, they will use, and they will move on. They might share, but they are not they're not like kind of a typical users that keep on using your product normally. They are innovators, and normally they love to try new things. So they would be happy to try your new things also. Next slide, please. Now, next slide. So as I said, in our case, we connected to that group by saying we are, people who are activists of road safety. And when we launched our solution through targeting that group, we got, for example, this is the media. We got, when we launched, we were covered in the media and newspaper and the TV. We didn't spend any money, but it was purely because we connected to a group of people. They found that what we are doing has a mission and a vision, and they thought, okay, we would like to cover that. And then also a lot of people then started using it. So next slide. Yeah, so the key to understand when you are launching to the innovators is you don't have to worry about a preferred product. You do not necessarily, although I have to solve a pain point in the first version, what you call an MVP, basically what we say, that what you are trying to do is you're trying to understand their intrinsic motivation. So for example, in our case, make roads safer, right? So these are people who are passionate about making the roads safer. So your first version of the app was kind of giving them an idea that, okay, how this will work, how they can use it, so that it kind of helps them to understand, okay, this is the potential future of this solution is. It doesn't have to be final product, but they say, oh, I love what you're doing, I'll be happy to write it. They're often also bloggers. They're also people that write about it. They're many times are influencers. So this is the way they would try out something. They will love the idea. They will love the things. They are not going to use your solution long term or regularly, but that's the first group to go into once you do that thing. Can you move to the next slide? Yeah. So once you reach to the innovators, they help you to propel their product from that initial innovator stage to the early adopter people, because a lot of people early adopters are following the innovators normally, right? And then, so next slide. So these are the people who early adopters are often looking for something extrinsic motivation. They want something in return. So not only that, okay, there's a big vision and mission is great, but they also need something in return. So next slide. Now, in our case, what we did, so for example, if I connect back to the solution that we had built, which was tracking how roads drive, how you can be a good driver, we connected it to a trip feedback. So they could actually see, for example, that they are getting some scores. And the next slide. And then what we did is every score when they were connected, they could get some free stuff. It doesn't have to be big stuff, but if they score drive well, they could get some free coffee and something like that. Now, again, just for you to understand that this was an extrinsic motivation of getting a free coffee. That's not an intrinsic motivation of doing good to the world, but extrinsic motivation, okay, I get something in return also for my action. So I'm using this app, I get rewarded, for example, like that. And that's the group of people that's how you connect to the early adopter market. To the next slide. And then, so basically, when you progressively launch your solution, the first solution, you create the first version, go to the innovators, they talk about it. Then you build the next version where you understand that you're slowly reaching to the early adopters. Then they will kind of, you connect to the extrinsic motivation, add a new feature, for example. In our case, that's how we did. Okay, they will get a free, they get some benefits. And they will be actually the people who kind of repeat, they will stay longer and they will repeat it. Next slide. And then from there, you move to the early majority, which is basically most of the people most of us lie in the majority market, right? So the next slide. And in this case, what you have to do is the early adopters are also happy to try out things, but they don't necessarily, you have to solve a real pain point for them. In the majority market, when you go, you really have to solve a pain point that you really say, okay, this is a problem that I have, and what you are doing is helping me solve the problem. So, and they're normally slow. And what in our case, for example, when you can move on to the next slide, it's fine. What in our case was that we said, okay, it will help you to reduce your insurance premiums. Because, for example, our key early majority was young people in their 20s and 30s who normally pay high premiums. So they would be saying, okay, I'm not interested in a free coffee here and there, but I am interested in reducing my insurance premium. So that's the group of people. Then we build a feature. Now, right from the beginning, think about it. If I build all of those features right in the first day, it would be too much to build. And as a startup, we all know the products you build feature over feature. So that's how you progressively, slowly build the features over and over again and target those right audience so that you keep on progressing further on to the next stage of the development and the next stage of the user group. So I hope that gives you a good idea about the first way, that how do you slowly build your solution, launch, and then move on to the next stage. The next point is that this is very, very important when you build AI solutions, is that you have to really make the value transparent and educate your users. Because normally people do not trust it. Now, when I use the word educate, I do not mean the terms and conditions in their app that people will just ignore and just accept. In our case, what we did, we realized that we are asking people to provide their driving data, which could be confidential and private data. And what we did was, no, the previous slide, sorry. What we did was that we actually send physical letters to people, to their addresses. Say, okay, we got their addresses saying, okay, this is what we are doing. This is how we are going to build the data and things like that. So that people really appreciated it. That's our way of doing it. There are many ways to do that. I remember there was a bank I was working with, and they said that they want to build an AI app which a 10-year-old kid can understand how the data is being used. And this actually helps a lot to build the trust among people that they can start using it. Okay. The third is also a very, very important point, which again, a lot of engineers make mistake, which I've seen over and over in big companies also, that we think of trying to too much automate the entire process. And by doing that, what we do is that we completely remove the human element of having control in nature. It's very important to keep the control still at humans. If you want people to use your solution, they should feel that they have the control in their hand. I'll give you this example. I gave these two pictures. This is one side is the previous one, sorry. This is one side is an app that we built. So where you can see there's a start button, the green button. So people actually still had a control to click on the start button and when they want to track their driver. On the other hand side, during the same time, there were many companies were coming up with something called OBD devices, which was basically a hardware device in the car. Although there was good benefits of that, the problem of that hardware device in the car was that you cannot stop it suddenly like that. It's kind of inbuilt in the car. And a lot of people didn't feel comfortable that kind of a car is inbuilt in the car. So the adoption was very low, actually. While where in a kind of solution where you feel the control, the adoption is normally higher. So whenever you're building such a solution, think about that. How can you keep the control at certain major points to the user so that they always feel in control? And now the final point is, I absolutely think that when I go around, I've spoken in many events, around the world, the most common question that I receive is ethical AI. They say that, how do you make sure that AI is ethical? And I'm not talking about, bureaucrats or politicians. I'm actually talking about common people. They are very concerned that, AI is ethical. And I've written this article, you guys can go, and I talk about this Milgram experiment, that why it is so essential that we build AI solutions that are ethical in nature. Because otherwise, if we let completely control to a machine, which in turn is controlled by some human, we can be completely, become like robots. We have almost no control in our life, which we could see in certain ways. So it's very, very important when we are building solutions, we think about how to build, let's say, ethical AI. And as an engineer, so we often, and at least my point was ethical AI is these are some buzzwords, some research work. But what I have found out, and my argument here is that to build ethical AI, we have to focus on 3 C's: is collaboration, compassion, consciousness. I will not go in details of each of the other two trees, compassion, consciousness, but I do talk about the collaboration of that. Why collaboration is very important when we build AI solutions. Next slide. First of all, what makes an AI solution unethical, to my mind, is unable to find the biases in the data. So it's very important that when you are in a team, you are building the solution, you have this diversity of opinions as much as possible. And I don't mean diversity as gender and race. I actually mean diversity of thoughts and ideas. And often I talk about this a room with, for example, everyone Stanford educated, 5 people, but different gender and races, is less diverse than a room of all white male, but from different parts of the world. Because we really need to have this diversity of thoughts and ideas coming up. And that would help to identify the biases in the data. So then once you get over that, then that would help to actually think more ethical AI solutions. The second part of this collaborative AI, that when you build a different team, people bring different perspectives. It's so important that when we build AI solutions, that we could create stories, we could connect to the users, understand their emotions, why they want to use it, what could be their objections, right? And my whole conjecture of what, for example, in my company I'm doing is, how do we build bottom-up environments and communities that could build more inclusive and ethical and trusted AI solutions. So in your case, for example, now when you're sitting, you think if you could bring up more diverse teams and things. And I actually have written an article about, I always say that why do we need women leadership more in AI? Because that creates this diversity of thoughts and process. And I'll give you an example before I end it. Can you go to the next slide? And this is a real story that I've heard about it actually from, I was in Switzerland, and it's a very interesting story someone told me. And she said that there were two groups were created. One was only women and one was only men. And they were told to develop a safety solution for some Swiss brands. And there was 4 weeks of work. And at the end of the 4 weeks, these two groups had to present what the work they did and what is the solution they found. And it's so interesting that how these two different groups actually worked and built the solution. The first solution was built by only women. They actually built a very simple technology. The technology itself was not that difficult. They're simple machine learning, simple regression, something like that. But what they focused on was telling a story. Telling a story which could emotionally connect to the people. Very important that that people could see, okay, why they need it, why they will use it, why people will adopt it. The other group were focused are very much on high-tech solution, which in AI, GPS, and video conferences. And I don't think there's anything wrong in that, but that was too much focus on facts and numbers and kind of not really connecting to the people. And when you have to really put out a product out to the market, you have to tell great stories. And before I end, I will tell you one story. I met one Microsoft. He was one of the top executives in Microsoft. I was in Kosovo. I met him, and he told me, and we were talking about what is the future of AI would be, and what, for example, Microsoft needs next. And he says Microsoft does not need more engineers; they need more storytellers that could take these technologies that we are building, like future AI technology, and tell beautiful stories that people can connect and use it. That's very, very important, I think, in terms of successful adoption of AI. So yeah, you can move to the last slide, which is basically thanks a lot thanks a lot, and wish you all guys the best.